Hello, I'm Patricia Harpring, Managing Editor of the Getty Vocabulary Program. I'm here to talk to you today about the Getty Vocabularies, unbiased and inclusive terminology. So first I'll give you a context for the Getty Vocabularies and then talk about the issues. Speaking from the Getty Center, we acknowledge that the land and the waters around the Getty Center and the villa are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tongva Gabrielino, Tataviam, and Chumash peoples, and we humbly pay respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of these groups, past, present, and emerging. So where do you find the Getty Vocabularies? If you go to any page on the Getty site and search for the word vocabularies, among the results, you'll see this page. On the left-hand navigation, you can search the data, get a link to access data releases, to see how to contribute. We have editorial guidelines and training materials. If you click any of the headings in the center, you will come up with this page where you can search the data online. For example, scroll or papiri here using Boolean operators. You can also find the data in relational tables, web services APIs, and XML, as well as LOD in several formats. We have a Sparkle endpoint and an open refined reconciliation service. All of the data is available under the Open Data Commons Attribution License. Here is a group of us standing at the new Getty Center, newly opened in 1997. And the Getty was a trailblazer in committing resources to standards and vocabularies for art information in the early 1980s. We were building on the work of the Thesaurus Artis Universalis at CIHA. The Getty engaged disparate communities, visual resources, museums, libraries, special collections, archives, and scholars. And then under Getty leadership, reach consensus on what is best cataloging practice, how to create vocabularies for cataloging research and discovery. Here are a group of us standing at the Getty Center in 2020, the International Terminology Working Group. Over the years, the vocabularies have changed with the requirements of our core community and our need to remain relevant. We partner with the international visual arts community. One of our primary goals is to create multilingual, multicultural, and inclusive terminology. We have a small editorial staff and a small technical team. For growth, we rely upon the over 350 contributors to the Getty Vocabularies. These are institutions, consortia, scholarly projects, and individual scholars. In a global environment where we strive to be more open and equitable while maintaining high standards for scholarship and research, the Getty Vocabularies intend to provide appropriate terms for art history and related disciplines. Today, I will present a selection of the issues surrounding this topic. We do not yet have all the answers. Successful resolutions in a rapidly changing world will be ongoing, occurring over months and years, and in concert with the expert user community of the Getty Vocabularies. Now, our users use the vocabularies for different purposes. For some users, the vocabularies promote consistency in the assignment of preferred terms, or to provide options for various terms for a concept, for cataloging and description. For other users, they're primarily interested only in linking to reference the unique identifier for the vocabulary record, or perhaps to otherwise reconcile their data. Yet other users use the vocabularies on the other end of the equation for retrieval and discovery, to utilize the variant terms, the broader, narrower contexts, and rich contextual data of the vocabularies. And then yet for others, the vocabularies are lookup resources of information, for example, like Little Encyclopedia. We do cater to our target audience and try to meet their needs. We recognize that the vocabularies are rich knowledge bases. They are not simple value vocabularies or authorities, but they are intended for enabling research and discovery. The Getty vocabularies are authoritative. We cite our authoritative sources and contributors, but they are not authoritarian. As far as we're concerned, users may use any of the variant terms and not just the flagged preferred terms. The Getty vocabularies comply with standards for controlled vocabularies in ISO and NISO. They are compiled from contributions of expert contributors, which at the Getty are vetted, normalized, and merged where there are duplicates, and processed. We then publish periodically throughout the year. There are 5 Getty vocabularies. Start with the Art and Architecture Thesaurus, or AAT. This includes generic terms in several languages, relationships, and other rich data for fields like scope notes, roles, materials, cultures. So here you'll find terms such as amphora, literati painters, Olmec culture. Here is a record for a full record for the Getty, an AAT record, steel engravings. Now we feel that the unique features of the vocabularies may aid in facilitating inclusivity and multicultural content through allowing different views of the vocabularies. Looking at this AAT record, one thing we feel is important are these unique IDs. There's an ID for the record overall, as well as for each term in that record, so users can link to those. We also note the languages and whether or not the term is preferred for that language. These various preferences, in fact, throughout the vocabularies allow for different views of the data, for different cultural views as well. There may be dates associated with the term, such as steel engravings having been used since 1792, etc. There are relationships in the vocabularies. There are associative relationships. So within the AAT, steel engravings, the work type, are produced by steel engraving, the process. They are distinguished from siderographs, which is another type of similar engraving. There are hierarchical relationships in the Getty vocabularies, and I'll go more into that later. Also, we always give credit and warrant, and there are co-references in the Getty vocabularies. For example, the terms and other information have contributors, and those are flagged. We have sources, published sources, and if there are co-references, we try to include those. In this case, we have the unique identifier for the Thesaurus of Graphic Materials record that matches this steel engravings record. Here's a view of our hierarchy for steel engravings. We use indentation to indicate broader and narrower contexts. For the AATs, typically genus-species relationships. We have guide terms and angled brackets that are intended to organize the hierarchies. And the qualifiers are these words that you see displaying in parentheses. Going on to TGN, the Getty Thesaurus of Geographic Names includes names, relationships, and other rich data, but with a special focus and development on historical information for current cities, historical nations, empires, archaeological sites, lost settlements, and physical features, but only as necessary for cataloging art. TGN is not comprehensive, and it's not a geographic information system. Terms you might find there are Diospolis, the Ottoman Empire, Machu Picchu, etc. And here's a view of a TGN record for Siena, Italy. And you see the layout is the same because the core fields of all the vocabularies are the same. We have a unique ID for the record and unique ID for each of the names in the record, dates associated with it as well. In the center, we have 2 hierarchical relationships. This illustrates that TGN and all the vocabularies are polyhierarchical. Siena is a part of Italy, but it's also a part of ancient Etruria, the second relationship. There are associative relationships. Siena was an ally of Pisa. On the right-hand side, you can start to see how the vocabularies are linked to each other. These place types, city, archiepiscopal see, etc., are linked to the AAT. Coordinates, etc. Down at the bottom, we see the all-important contributors for the terms and also for various other information, and the sources, including co-references, in this case to the NGA US government site for this place, and Library of Congress Authority record for this place, as well as VIAF. And this is how Siena displays in its historical hierarchy for Etruria, again, with indentation. Going on to ULAN, the Union List of Artist Names. Here we include names, relationships, and other rich data for people, for artists and architects, for firms, studios, repositories of art, whether named or anonymous. Here you might find terms such as the painter Mark Rothko, the anonymous Crevillé master, or the architectural firm I.M. Pei and Partners. And here's the record, again, very similar layout with an ID for the record, ID for each of the names for this printmaker, Japanese printmaker Hokusai. We have languages and preferences and dates, etc. In the center, we have the biographical information for Hokusai linked to the AAT for the roles. On the far right, you see linked to TGN for his places of birth and death. We have associative relationships, and at the bottom, the contributors for the names and other information, the sources, and a link, a co-reference to Library of Congress record for Hokusai. Here's a hierarchy for ULAN. The person's facet is rather flat, of course, for people, but you see down with corporate bodies how there can be some depth to the hierarchy when you're talking about, for example, the parts of an institute. The Getty Iconography Authority includes proper names, relationships, and other rich data for iconographical narratives, religious or fictional characters, and other topics. So here you'll find terms such as the Maya underworld, Jivaba, the god Shiva. Here is a full record for Avalokiteshvara, with the IDs for the record and the names, the links to other vocabularies, his role or characteristic from AAT, Bodhisattva. We have associative relationships is associated with Krishna, counterpart is Guanyin. And down at the bottom, we have the contributors and the sources. Here we've linked to the Library of Congress subject heading for Avalokiteshvara, but if there were a record also for this person in icon class, which is another iconography authority, there would be a link for that as well. And here is the hierarchy of Avalokiteshvara using indention to show he's is an instance of a Buddhist character and Buddhist iconography, etc. Kona, the Cultural Objects Name Authority. That's the last vocabulary. We have titles and artist attribution and different information for works of art and architecture. We're focusing on development on architecture, multiples, works. Multiples are prints and other things made in multiples. Works depicted in other works, lost works, and works that are designed but not built. So here you might find the architectural subject, Hagia Sophia, the Flatiron Building in New York, the print, The Great Wave by Hokusai, for example. Here's a sample record. This is for the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, where we have the IDs for the record and the terms, dates. In the center, you see how Kona is linked to AAT for work types, linked to ULAN for the patrons and creator, linked to TGN for the location on the right, and down at the bottom, again, the contributors for the information, as well as co-references to sources such as the Built-Work Registry, Library of Congress, and the UNESCO World Heritage Center. Here is the Temple of Heaven displaying in its hierarchy. So the vocabulary structure and practice, we feel, can facilitate the display of the data with diverse points of view, and this is important for inclusivity. There are many, many links between the various Getty vocabularies illustrated in this chart. Now let's look at some of the issues specifically. So first of all, we had to figure out where are we now. We looked at the languages in the AAT and the nationalities in ULAN, for example, and we saw, as we suspected, the content of the vocabularies is often Western-centric due to who historically our contributors have been. But we are in the process of improving these wedges and these pie charts. The Getty vocabularies are used all over the world. However, the largest group of users comes from the United States, and we are in the process of improving that. How do we get to our goals? We look at the other work going on at the Getty, but also in related disciplines, for example, the library community. The Getty vocabularies provide terminology in use by the community. They do not prescribe how to use the terms beyond occasional scope note suggestions. Instead, the Getty vocabularies assist in decision-making by providing contextual information. For example, these preferences I talked about may inform the users. There's an overall preference for the term most commonly used in authoritative scholarly publications in English, but we also have preferences for each other language, for each contributor, and the preferences of each published source. So this may aid you in your decisions. Also, there are additional flags that further classify the terms. Pejorative and objectionable terms are labeled avoid use for new indexing. Those terms that are preferred by a particular culture might be noted. The Getty vocabulary lacks the expertise and frankly the resources to advise which is absolutely the best term for the millions of concepts in our vocabularies. But to actuate change in flagging preferred terms or to increase diversity, the user community may contribute to the vocabularies. You could do so through working with your professional organizations, or maybe form consortia where you work with experts or even tribal representatives to better improve the Getty vocabularies. Let's look at a few of these issues specifically. So we want to facilitate use of unbiased terminology. So a term formerly illegal aliens, now the preferred term is undocumented immigrants. Well, this corresponds with Library of Congress practice. Illegal aliens now has been deprecated and non-citizens is the preferred term. However, in Library of Congress, we see that links or mapping to the Getty vocabularies is not a one-to-one relationship. In the 450 fields, there are terms such as expatriates and foreign residents, and these, according to the AAT, are not true synonyms, so they cannot be used interchangeably. But in AAT, all used for must be true synonyms, so our purposes differ. Library of Congress is grouping headings that may be used to index similar topics, but AAT is grouping synonyms for disambiguation and precision in indexing and research. So some of those 450 terms might show up in other AAT records, such as non-citizens and expatriates in this case, and be linked back to the other record. We respect diverse points of view, and sometimes this is explained in the scope note. This note says, wherever possible, use the specific tribal name. But if you have to use a general term, Native American is widely used in the US, but many groups now prefer American Indian or Indigenous American, and all of these terms are provided for you. Here's another example where the term Anasazi has now flagged avoid use. This term describing this pre-Columbian Southwestern North American culture was used for many decades. But now the term preferred is ancestral Puebloan because it's preferred by the descendants of these people. And also this coincides with the preponderance of modern scholarly usage. Here's another example. We do not force terms into an existing record with an English preferred term. Here's a Nahuatl term, and I won't attempt to pronounce it, but it's used as a loan term in English and in Spanish publications. We do have a literal translation in English, but that one is not flagged as preferred. We respect the cultural differences in the iconography authority as well, where you can imagine where you're talking about deities, you have to be very careful. We try to involve scholarly experts and or members of the community or their descendants if referenced if possible. We try to provide terminology that users might need. With these issues, here's an example in the gender identity portion of our hierarchies, where we've added terms recently, including, as highlighted here, gender non-binary. We want to be sensitive to biased historical points of view. Here's an example where in the US, many place names in TGN here have now been deprecated and are flagged pejorative because they have in them the word squaw, which is refers to a Native American female, but it's a pejorative term. And instead the preferred term in this case is alder spring. Also in TGN, the polyhierarchy can help us represent overlapping jurisdictions. Here we note that Blue Gap is part of the Navajo Nation in the United States. However, due to the polyhierarchy, we can also show that Blue Gap is part of the state of Arizona in the US. In Kona, the same issues apply. We want to look at historical points of view. This is Hagia Sophia, which started as a church and then was a mosque and then a museum and now a mosque again. We give this information to the users with the languages and the dates and allow them to choose which term is most pertinent for their indexing. We try to acknowledge various cultural traditions. Here we are back with the record of Hokusai, the Japanese printmaker, and one of his names, Sori, is flagged as an art name. This is a name he used early in his career. And we can use the same facility to improve inclusivity and multiculturalism in the vocabularies. From this list of terms and these flags, we could use, for example, adult name to indicate the name conferred at adulthood in certain cultures. We could use the flag changed name for a transgender artist who changed his name, his or her name. Now, this brings up the issue of personal privacy when you're talking about biographical information, and we need to balance this, we feel, with a critical ability to do research. Here's still on the record for the 18th century artist Hokusai. We have his gender as male and places where he worked, his adoptive parent. But when you're talking about current or recently living people, the issue becomes more pronounced. Here we have a record for the artist whose birth name is Anna Prinner and later changed their name to Anton Prinner because they're transgender. So this is an open issue, but we feel when it is established through reliable published sources that the artist so self-identifies, it may be important to include this. Privacy is paramount, but to eliminate knowledge is to deny research. People want to research female artists and African-American artists. An artist's oeuvre may be influenced by or publicly focused on their own gender identity or sexual preference. If we include this data, then this research may be done. But this is different from the Library of Congress recommendation for personal name authorities. They advise not to include gender because the primary goal of their authority is for disambiguation, not contextual biographical information. So we differ there. And then finally, accessibility and inclusivity. For accessibility, that usually is referring to a physical space, but also it refers to web design, so it applies to us. We are redesigning our site and want it to be usable by people with disabilities, physical or cognitive. But we expand this to also apply to various other slices of audiences. So we feel that regardless of money or advanced technology or technical expertise, the vocabulary should be available. Regardless of cultural language differences, the vocabulary should be available. And regardless of intention. So for our scholarly research or casually interested user, as well as technical developers, the vocabulary should be available and usable. With these different audiences, they may require different releases and access to the data. This is something we're working out now. And as we look to the future, we are reimagining how to make the vocabularies ever more multicultural and available in the current climate, and planning development for several audiences. Another thing we're doing is to improve interconnectivity. We know this is very important. In the center, you see the vocabularies all linked to each other, but we're trying more and more to link to co-references out to other resources. Thank you for your attention this morning. I appreciate it.